Welcome to Doctors on Call. I'm Jenna Miller. When a person experiences a traumatic event, the body's defenses take effect and a stress response is created. A person may feel various symptoms, whether it be physical, mental, or emotional. Behavioral changes can also take place. The 4 county fires this past December created trauma for countless individuals and families in the area. Tonight we'll be discussing how these families can move past the trauma of these events, along with tips for keeping your mental health in check with our guests, Dayna Hauschild and Beth Christians from High Plains Mental Health Center.
Presentation of Doctors on Call on Smoky Hills PBS is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
Hutchinson Regional Healthcare System. Our family caring for yours.
At Osborne County Memorial Hospital, our services range from clinic visits to inpatient and skilled care, but our specialty is you.
Your family is our family. The staff at Smith County Memorial Hospital wants to set the standard of excellence for healthcare in north central Kansas.
Russell Regional Hospital, experts, neighbors, friends.
Welcome back to Doctors on Call. Tonight we are discussing mental health. Beth Christians is a licensed clinical marriage and family therapist and licensed clinical addictions counselor. She has been with High Plains Mental Health Center for 15 years and works in the Osborne branch office. Beth is a senior outpatient clinical supervisor, and her practice focuses on youth and family therapy with specialized training in trauma-informed therapy and dialectical behavior therapy interventions. Dayna Hauschild is a licensed professional counselor at High Plains Mental Health Center. Dayna is an outpatient therapist in the Hayes main office who primarily works with children and families. Dayna is a native of Topeka and new to High Plains Mental Health Center, but has extensive experience in providing mental health services. Give us a call at 800-337-4788 toll-free with your medical questions about mental health on Doctors on Call. Our show brings you information which may be useful to you when you see your own physician or therapist. Thank you both so much for coming and joining us tonight. Let's talk about first, individually, what is your approach to therapy?
Sure. Well, I think we both would say we're pretty eclectic. We have about 25 therapists within the agency, and so we all have our own interests. But I would say for me, it's mostly individual and family therapy, focusing on trauma and just doing a lot of cognitive behavioral and dialectical behavior strategies, which basically means we talk about how we think and then how that impacts then how we feel and then what to do with those emotions. So,
Dayna?
And I traditionally have worked a lot in play therapy with children, worked most of my career with children and their families, done a lot of work with kids within the foster care system, and a lot of transitions that kids undergo and the trauma that can cause. So I'm just happy to be at High Plains and working there in mental health.
All right, Dayna, you mentioned play therapy. Can you explain what that is?
It's a modality that kids naturally do, and so there's there's directive and non-directive, where the kids kind of choose and direct the session, and other times where the therapist is more directive and has specific outcomes that they want to try and reach with the child, by lots of toys, lots of games, a lot of time not sitting in a chair conversing back and forth, and it seems to help them process their emotions and in a more natural setting than verbally just conversing about it.
Excellent. What else can a person expect from a therapy session?
sure. Our typical sessions are about 45 to 50 minutes in length. We have some families that prefer to do it with everybody in the family unit present. Sometimes we'll have parents that say they'd like their child to engage in that individual, sometimes play therapy or talk therapy sessions. So, and we typically say between 8 and 12 sessions to get started, and then after that we evaluate if there's some further sessions needed after that.
What about you, Dayna?
I would agree with that. Most of the, and depending on especially for foster kids, how often they've moved, how they come and present to us, the different issues facing them. It takes a good to 10 weeks probably to establish a good therapeutic relationship with them and earn trust of kids and in the families, and to know that we're a support, we're a resource for them to help them meet their challenges that they have.
Now, if a person feels they need to reach out for mental health, what do they need to do? Mental health help, I might add.
Sure.
We have multiple ways to reach out. We have a website, High Plains Mental Health Center .com. I think that's what it's called. And we also have some phone numbers. I don't have them memorized because I'm so new. I haven't memorized them. I don't call them. But they can do it through just calling the office and scheduling appointments. We have 6 outreach centers. So, and those are equipped for people to go in, and we can use telehealth. We use a lot of telehealth to get services to the brighter catchment area that we serve. So,
Speaking of telehealth, do you find that that's an awesome option for, especially during this, during the COVID outbreak? Do you find that it's more that you do better with an in-person session, or is telehealth, do you feel just as good?
I would say we've found benefits definitely to telehealth. What most people don't know is there were a lot of medical providers doing telehealth before COVID. We as behavioral mental health providers really started to use it then when COVID came along, so that we could keep that relationship with our kids and families. I think we were all a little bit hesitant when it
was
first
a big learning curve.
came
Yes.
to think, is this really going to work? But we've found over the last couple years, we've really worked hard to come up with good strategies that are just as valuable via telehealth as they would be in person. I would say there are some very young kids, some of the kids we see at 4 or 5 years of age may not be the best fit for telehealth, but I would say in general our upper elementary, junior high, high school kids have really benefited from that option. We have actually expanded a lot of our services into the schools, and so instead of a child having to get out of school, drive to our office for a session, and then drive back to school, which could take up to 2 to 3 hours of their time, we are now connecting with the school via telehealth. And so they're only missing about 45 minutes of class, and then they get right back to class. So it's been a really great way to do more consistent therapy, and we've been pleased with the outcomes we've seen.
Excellent. Dayna, you had mentioned something about building the trust between the therapist and the client. If a person is not sure whether they want to come because they're worried about privacy or whatnot that you are able to share with other people, what would you say to that person?
The confidentiality piece the way I explain it to kids is kind of, if they're that I'm a mandated reporter, and what that basically means is that if I feel like they're gonna hurt themselves, or they're gonna hurt somebody else, or somebody's going to hurt them, I have a duty to report that, or if I'm required by law, by a judge, to talk about it, and they seem to kind of understand that. I don't know that it scares them. I said, otherwise, I think sometimes, especially for teens, they wonder, what about my parents? What are you going to tell my parents? And I talk in generalities when I talk with parents, unless the client specifically requests to talk in a family session about something. I tend to talk in generalities with parents about what we're working on if they're not initially part of the session.
And one of the things, Jenna, we've also found, Dayna and I and our team, is if we kind of set from the very get-go what the expectations are with the family and say, we're going to do family sessions, are we doing individual? Mom and dad, how much do you want to know? Obviously, we have to say if there's concerns of safety, but I think that's part of our rapport building too, is to really establish what is the family needing from us, and then how do we help meet those needs.
Excellent. Beth, as a marriage counselor, how do you find couples can strengthen their marriage through counseling?
Sure. I think in our busy world, in the come and go that we have, especially recently, it's important to invest in relationships. One of the ways that some couples and families do that is coming to therapy, and so that's a option where we really work on communication skills, we work on conflict resolution skills, we work on coping skills, and just helping families really problem solve some of the things that they might have challenges with. And we really try to normalize that, you know, a lot of people I think come into therapy thinking, I must be crazy. We hear that a lot, or something's wrong with me. And we really try to normalize, you know, there's a lot of people, especially post-pandemic, who have come for therapy just to process what's happened in our world and in our relationships in the last few years.
Now, do you find that some couples come in not necessarily having problems, if you will, that they just want to strengthen their marriage?
I would agree. In fact, we encourage that because we really would say being proactive and problem shooting some of those communication issues and conflict issues is better than waiting until it becomes a concern. So,
Excellent. Let's talk about kids. You know, there's stresses that they are faced with now that I don't think they've ever been in history have ever been faced with. What techniques can you suggest that might help them cope?
Probably my number one technique is be vigilant as a parent with social media, and you know, those little devices do have off switches. Make sure they understand they can turn it off, and I think probably I've seen an increase in anxiety and depression among younger people, kids, just because they are so tuned into that, and so helping families set limits with that, and you know, there's so much out there, even as a therapist, trying to keep up on the latest apps and things, and so really just monitoring their usage, and helping kids and teens understand that it's not a right to have electronic equipment, it's a privilege. And so helping them learn how to establish boundaries within that world. Because I think it's easy to sit there and text out what you're feeling, but you're not aware where it all goes past beyond that. So learning to help them establish boundaries, keep themselves safe, keep other people safe.
Excellent. Now, the end of the school year is right around the corner. So what kind of advice do you have to help kids get through these next few stressful weeks?
Sure. Well, one of the things we just like to, I mean, we have lots of teachers that we work with, and we've talked with them a little bit too. They've reminded us, like, this is the end of the school year. There's a lot of changes that happen in the last month. You have concerts and school trips and things like that, things that are out of the normal routine. So what we know is kids do better in routine. The brain is very pattern seeking. And so the last few weeks of school tends to be not very pattern seeking.
Yeah.
And so we really encourage families to make sure their kids are getting good sleep, try to keep some patterns in place, regular meals, regular sleep habits, help kids that maybe are a little bit more anxious to prepare for some of those events that might be different in their week, have a good schedule. Kids do better with visuals, so instead of just telling them, hey, you have this coming up, have a visual reminder or calendar. We tell a lot of our families, you know, have a staging area the night before for whatever event you have the next day, so nobody's rushing around in the morning and getting upset because they can't find their tennis racket or the track shoes, or and we really encourage families to think about planning ahead. Like, what is summer going to look like? You're not going to be in school all day. Will you go to daycare? Will you go to grandma's? What's the plan for the afternoons? And so just really starting to think now, even though it's 6 weeks away yet, really thinking about what's this pattern going to be in the summertime. So we can keep that brain, what's coming up. It helps those anxious brains.
Sure. So then, of course, once you get through the summer, then you got to rev back up for the school year. So how do you, a lot of times there aren't, great schedules during the summers, just, stay up late, get up late, type of thing. So how do families prepare then to start? And that's the routine again of school.
But I guess I kind of go by the commercial, what is it, after Independence Day, things start gearing up for fall in stores. And so when you begin to see things gear up for fall, begin gearing up for fall, kind of beginning to slowly introduce an earlier bedtime, more routine, begin prepping that, you know, we're going to be in 3 weeks, going to be going back to school. Help be consistent on the patterns that you create, that so once school comes, it's more of a natural transition rather than a sudden halt to staying up late and then trying to make it through the first week of school. So just being aware that when sports kind of slow down, that's kind of your cue that fall is getting ready to gear up. And so still enjoy it, but begin to put some boundaries around it for kids, I think is important.
Excellent. We want to remind our viewers that we are talking about mental health tonight. You can give us a call at 800-337-4788 if you have a question for one of our counselors today. How important is it to stay both physically and mentally healthy, especially during these difficult times? We're kind of, I don't know, out of the pandemic, but not out of the pandemic. I think everybody's still trying to figure it all out.
Agreed.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
still not a pattern yet.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're still kind of discovering all that the pandemic did, the uncertainty, the unrest it created. I think that our kids have had a lot. I mean, we experienced the stress of learning anew. For us, it was probably more telehealth and just getting comfortable with that modality of therapy. But it was for kids, even though they were doing some online stuff, it went all online. And that, I think that was just a big shock to their system, and I think they're still reeling from it a little bit. And life continued on, and they went on to the next grade, but I think we're beginning to see that we missed a lot during that time as well. And so the kids are trying to figure out, how do I get caught up? How do I get back into a routine? Kids are great at navigating electronics. However, I don't know that they're great at navigating lessons on the electronics. So, you know, I think that's been a source of anxiety and just led to a lot of isolation and falling out of ways to be around other people. Even now, we're still want to maintain our distance from folks. So I think that we're going to probably for the next couple of years see kind of people still talking about that, because it's kind of like all of a sudden everything we knew went out the window. And so helping people just transition back into, because I think it won't necessarily return to pre-pandemic days, but I think it'll be a new normal, and that's always uncomfortable for people.
And what we know about brain science is when stress happens, especially more traumatic stress, the brain tends to get stuck at times in that. And so thinking about a lot of these kids, when the pandemic hit 2 years ago, you know, they're 2 years older chronologically, but emotionally and socially, there's some delays there.
Yeah.
And so I think we as adults, it's taken a lot of compassion and mindfulness for adults to really be aware of, yes, this might be a 12-year-old in chronological age, but I really have to think about what are they missing at that 10 and 11-year-old stage that they didn't get during that pandemic period where they were socially isolated. And so just catching up on some of those skills is what we've really been working with kids on lately.
Sure. And what are some healthy habits that an individual, whether they're an adult or a child, can adopt so that they don't, you know, adopt bad habits that could turn into addiction?
Well, I seem to be telling a lot of my clients exercise. And they look at me like I'm a little strange, which may be true, but you know, that really increases the neurotransmitters in our brain to make us feel better. We're better able to function. We have a release for the stress. And so taking time out of your schedule to take a little walk or to go outside and play with your dog or go to the park. Just being outside, getting into that routine of not spending so much time on your video games, but taking time to go outside and enjoy nature, go for a hike or things like that, are some things that I really encourage kids to do, because as they, especially early elementary, they still have a couple recesses, so they get to go out, but as they age, they may never see the outside in the whole time they're at school. So helping them, there's just something about being outside that's promotes wellness, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
We spoke in the open about the 4 county fires that were back in December and how devastating those were. They affected many families in our coverage area around the state. How can families get through these traumatic events? They're still dealing with a lot of stuff.
Yes. We have had a lot of people reach out to us with questions on this very thing, just because it has been so devastating and affected so many people of different ages. And what we have found is how important it is for the communities. I think what we say with trauma work is also looking at the resiliency, and what we see with people and resiliency is how do communities come together, which I know we have been very impressed with how the different communities have bonded through this and really worked on supporting each other and neighbor helping neighbor. You know, I think I grew up as a farm kid, and you know, I think farming has moved away a little bit from that, so it was good to see the community farmers coming back in together, and farmers from other states and other counties bringing in, you know, supplies and saying, how can we help? Because they recognized that it was devastating. And so I think it's that community spirit. We know that healing happens in relationships, and so for these families to really, you know, don't isolate. If we can tell you anything, don't isolate.
Make connections.
You know, and we understand, like, as farm kids and families out here, like, you're used to being strong and doing a lot of this on your own, 5th generation farmers, but we'd say don't isolate. Reach out to your neighbor. Say, hey, can you help me with this fencing? I got to get it up before the cows get to pasture. And hey, my kid, you know, is struggling. You know, could you take them, you know, to school today? I've got to get, you know, just getting together and working together as a community and telling the stories. What we know, the other part about trauma is when we talk about it away from the situation, the more removed we are, the better. So the more stories we can tell each other, and so we can remember what happened, but in a less intense environment that's supportive.
It's very tough asking for help. I feel like especially in this part of the country, it's very tough. But if you suspect that someone needs help but isn't asking for it, is there something you can do for them?
Sure. So we actually have emergency services at any time. We also have a crisis line. It's our 1-800-432-0333 number. You can access services through that number. You can also use that as our crisis line. That's available 24/7. So if you're concerned about an individual, family member, you know, reach out. We have resources. We have options for people. We have a crisis Schwaller Center in Hayes. It's a 4-bed adult unit for somebody that just needs a little bit of a break. They don't want to go to the hospital. They don't meet that level, but they're needing more than what's happening right now.
And on the horizon, especially for children and youth, KVC will be coming back to Hayes here in probably about a year once they get their new facility built and up and running. So that will be nice for when children and youth need, if they need crisis stabilization, to have that facility here, because right now it's driving 3 hours, Kansas City, Wichita. If those are full, it may be another state. It just, so it's you know, even though that's still a year out, it'll be really nice to have that facility here so that we can have access to it, and it's more family friendly for folks out this way.
What is trauma-informed therapy?
I'll go for it.
We both use a lot of it.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, trauma-informed therapy as a whole is helping identify if someone has been through a traumatic event that's causing more stress than they're able to cope with. What we know about trauma, and the definition of trauma, is when an event occurs that a person experiences and it overloads their internal and external resources. So they don't have the coping skills, they don't have the family resources, they don't have the emotional supports to be able to cope with that. And so we come in and try to help provide those supports.
Great.
So a lot of trauma-informed therapy is just gathering resources and getting more supports in those areas.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for being our guest tonight. That just about wraps it up for this week. On our next Doctors on Call, we'll be discussing doctor-assisted weight loss. You can email questions to our next program. That address is doctors@shptv.org. Thank you for joining us for Doctors on Call. I'm Jenna Miller.
Presentation of Doctors on Call on Smoky Hills PBS is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
Hutchinson Regional Healthcare System. Our family caring for yours.
At Osborne County Memorial Hospital, our services range from clinic visits to inpatient and skilled care, but our specialty is you.
Your family is our family. The staff at Smith County Memorial Hospital wants to set the standard of excellence for healthcare in north central Kansas.
Russell Regional Hospital, experts, neighbors, friends.